It's a standard, okay? Anything else? Using according to the license, perfectly right. Right? So the compliance is nothing but a due diligence. So before I make a use of open source software, I need to ensure that I comply with the licensing terms and conditions which is associated with that open source software. The second aspect is security. You download the open source component from a community website and you directly integrate into your product or application. Do you know that whoever has written this code has written securely this code? Let's say, what if due to this code, your application gets hacked? The third thing is, if somebody has put their heart and blood into developing this open source software, it's not right to, directly using this particular open source component in code without giving a credit to the original author. Right? So compliance means all these three. The first one is ensuring that because of the open source software, your company do not get into the legal issues. Right? Second is the security aspect. And the third one is the one who has developed this code. Let's say you are putting into your product or application and selling in the market, you are making money, but who has developed it is not getting any credit out of it. Right? So it's not right. So the compliance is nothing but to ensuring that your company does not get into any legal issues and whatever components you have integrated into your product application is securely integrated. Right? Now moving forward. Now this again is survey on a Sonatype. It's open source repository, as you know. The 80% of the total people who participated in this survey, there are 2,500 developers, architects and managers participated in the survey. They said that we do not have any corporate standard on the open source compliance. Right? The 20% said that we cannot use it until unless we get approval from the legal or the security team. The another view, the 50% of the total survey said that we do not have any policy in place. Rest of them have a policy, but may not be being enforced. Right? So if if policy is not sure, see anyways it's human nature, right? I mean, we generally tend to do the things which we are told to do. We will not do the things if it's not defined at the corporate level. So if the open source security policy is not defined, we are not going to work accordingly. As a matter of fact, this is one of the audits which we've done. The audit was done for around 16 GB of code, around 60 million lines of code. So what company believed that they had 300 components, the open source component which they are using into their product and application. But the actual audit said that the number is 840. Near to 840. Right. Now, are we aware about this? What could be the legal implications? They said some of the open source component which we are using and the open source author decide to take company to the court. Right. This is another aspect. These are the graph shows the open source component being used over, let's say, 13 audits we have done. On an average, organizations have 200 components which are downloaded from the open source component. It could be, let's say, 2 lines or 5 lines or 100 lines copied from the open source component, or the open source component as it is downloaded and being used in the product or application. Right? So on an average, these are 200 components. And we all agree that we use the open source because we have a tight deadlines, right, to meet, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If somebody has developed, we'll use it. Right? But we need to ensure that we comply to the licensing terms of that open source component. Now this is a little bit busy slide, but some of the issues which I want to highlight. Right? So start with this code with unknown license. The code, let's say, developed in somewhere in, let's say, 1998, and today is what, 2012. So you don't know that from where this code came from. Right? And there are a couple of open source components which are released under the license. Let's say, for example, tomorrow if I decide to release the open source component, I say it's a Jai Kishan Nirmal's open source license. And these are non-standard licenses. So the code which I have copied from somewhere associated with the unknown license, so I don't know what's supposed to be done. The Stack Overflow, I'm sure you must be using this. It's a question and answer site. You ask questions, somebody from community replies to it. Very popular site, more than 1 million users. Do you know that whatever contributions are made on that, that comes under the CC Wiki with attribution license? It means that if you decide to use as a part of your code, you need to give a credit to the original author. Okay, China. Okay, so China, wherever you go, in whichever part of world you go, the one thing is they are good at producing, right? So they also produce a lot of open source. Maybe they not have produced it. Maybe they have taken from somewhere else. So that's where they put hackchina.com. So this again a repository from where you can download the open source code. This is basically a Chinese community. Now it is renamed as a codeforge.cn. So let's say if you are using something from this community, you need to be sure that you are actually legally allowed to use this code into your product or application, specifically the one which you are modifying or commercially distributing to your customers. The images with the unknown origin. So this is not about the code. Sometimes let's say to give a better web interface, what we do is we download the images from the internet, directly put into our product or application. Right? So we never think that who could be the original producer of this image. Right? So we need to look at that aspect as well. GNU Affero GPL. Right? Before that, I would like to talk more on the GPL and GPL2 aspect. Okay. Now my question to you is, can you use the open source component which is released under the GPL license? Yes? No? Okay. Okay, let's say for example in your organization you decide that we want to sell our product to our customers and I want to use an open source component which is associated with the GPL license. Can we use that? Okay. Exactly. So GPL says that, so there are two aspects to it. For example, the moment you put the GPL code, whether it's a 2 lines or the entire component into your product or application, you are obliged to make the source code available for your application as well to the community, right? So if you are okay distributing your code, I'm not talking about the open source code which you downloaded, but your code to the community, yeah, then it's okay to use it. Second is, let's say if you make any modifications, right? So those modifications needs to be also distributed to the community. Right? As I'm not against it, but let's say if your company policy, company has developed some IP over a period of years, there's something unique, they based on this they are standing in the competition. But let's say because of the GPL, which probably let's say developer might have copied from somewhere and put into the code, saying that nobody would come to know, but let's say the moment the guy who has developed the original GPL code, he comes to know, probably he might create a legal issues against that company. Right? Okay. GNU Affero GPL. So now the GPL talks about that if you are modifying the code or distributing the code to the, if you are modifying the code or if you decide to distribute your product, you need to make the entire source code available to the community. So somebody says, okay, fine, I am not distributing it, I am modifying it, but it still stays into my premise because I am launching it as a web service. So even though it's a GPL component, I am not supposed to release the code of my application or product. To fix that flow, the community came up with a license called GNU Affero GPL. So let's say if you are distributing if you, let's say for example, you launch your service as a SaaS, software as a service, or let's say PaaS, platform as a service, and if that component which you are using as a part of your SaaS or PaaS product, in that case, you need to make the modification available to the community. Okay, the next one is very interesting, the previous company code. Right, so developers change the company, one company to another company, right? So the code also travels with them, right? So the code which he might have developed 5 years back, let's say not all the cases, but in some of the cases, the code comes to the new company. He said, I did something on similar line in the previous company, why should I again do it? I can use it, right? So now that code is okay. I mean, that there are different issues, ethics and all this is different issues. But let's say if that code is coming under the, let's say again that company has downloaded from this open source community, and let's say it's a kind of a GPL code. Ultimately, in this company, you might be obliged to the licensing terms of the GPL, even though you don't know that you are obliged. But since you are using that code, you need to adhere to the GPL licensing terms. Right? Generic Android tablets. So nowadays, first iPad Apple started, and then we had a Samsung Galaxy Tab from the Android. And now there are many players in the market who have developed the tablets based on the Android operating system. Right? So Android is under the Apache license, but the kernel which it utilize from a Linux is under the GPL. So the moment you put your tablet in the market, you need to make the source code available, you need to make the modifications available in the community. Right? Customers are demanding more and more. Nowadays, whenever the company signs a contract with the customer, what customer says, when you deliver a code to me, you ensure that you are not delivering any IP infringement related issue to my company. Right? And of course, they expect, okay, you are okay to use open source software while you are developing the product application, but you ensure that any legal issue you are not transferring to me, because ultimately I am going to own this code and I should not be responsible for that. Right? Okay. SaaS, PaaS and web service, as we discussed, if you are not distributing it, and let's say if it is released under the GPL license, is perfectly fine. Released under the Apache license or any other academic license is perfectly fine. But let's say if it comes to the GNU affiliate GPL license, in that case you need to ensure that you make the modification available to the community. Right? Let's say today you decide that I'll go for a SaaS-based model. Tomorrow, let's say the organization change the strategy. No, I don't want to distribute the service. Instead, I want to now focus on the enterprise model. So if you are using any code which is coming under the open source license like GPL, probably that could create an issue. Right? Okay. Moving forward, M&A situation, merger and acquisition. Let's say your company acquires some other company. Along with that, it gets the entire product portfolio. Right? So at the time of when the agreements are being made, at that time the code is being shared to ensure that the acquiring company are not getting any IP infringement related issues. Right? But at that time, the company might say that this particular piece or component we don't have a original source code. Instead, we have only jar file or DLL file. Right? So, but when the acquisition is over, and all of a sudden you get a code which was missing at the time of acquisition. Right? Now, this code, possibility that it might be creating some kind of legal implications in your organization, the acquiring organization. Binary, tens and thousands of lakhs of binaries. So somebody has developed in 1995, but right now we don't have source code for that. So we don't know what is the original source of this binaries. Right? Minification of JavaScript. Sorry, we convert the JavaScript into the minified version of it to ensure that we have a optimized or compressed code. So, and at that time probably we might be removing the licensing terms which is there mentioned in the JavaScript which we download from the open source community, right? But even in the even you minify the JavaScript, you need to retain those licensing terms. Okay. Sometimes let's say the question comes, we don't have the source. I have only binary, I have only jar file. I don't know where the source is. So in this kind of situation, it's very difficult to identify what could be the IP infringement related issues which this jar could be bringing to your organization. Okay. So in a nutshell, I'm not telling here that you should not use a code which is, let's say, from a GPL or let's say Apache. This point is simple. When you are using somebody's code, we need to adhere to the licensing terms which is defined by the original author. Right? Okay. So now since we understand the issue, let's try to find a solution for it. Okay, so this is kind of a table which I are trying to put together that where there could be a potential risk. For example, let's say one open source component which you want to utilize for let's say internal in-house project, right, and you are modifying the code, then probably it is low risk because you are not going to make any money out of it, or you are not going to distribute it to the outside. But if you see the other situation, let's say you are downloading some open source code which is going to be modified and you are going to distribute to your customers, probably you need to look at the licensing terms, right? So the risk is more there. The risk in the sense somebody gets to know about it, or it might put your organization into the legal risk. Okay, let's try to understand the complete picture. When I say risk, so typically from a security perspective, we divide into three aspects. One is the weakness in the system. The second is a threat. What threat which could be realized by an external entity, and the impact. What impact it will have? Let's say if the risk is realized by let's say somebody. Let's say you implement the controls to reduce the risk or eliminate the risk, then what you will be left with is the residual risk, the risk which I am left with implementing the controls. And let's say the business accepts it, is kind of the risk which I want to live with. I am okay with that. And overall your risk management should be complied with the organization policy. For example, your organization policy says that any application or software, before it gets shipped to the customer, you need to ensure that it is free from the vulnerabilities, it is secure, right? The second policy might say that the whatever code you develop and you deliver to your customer, it is free from the legal issues. Now let's take an example from a security perspective. What could be the weakness in the system? Let's say lack of input validation could be lead to vulnerabilities like SQL injection or cross-site scripting, which ultimately gives an attacker a kind of access to the database, right? So attacker taking our data, that could be the potential threat there, and the impact will be, let's say if somebody realizes this threat, your data will be exposed to the outsider, right? Now to mitigate this, what we have, so in each and every function which takes the input from the user, let's say we implement the input validation checks to ensure that somebody doesn't provide the kind of a SQL injection or cross-site scripting related inputs, right? And what we are left with, let's say for example, if we implement the proper controls, probably we are like near to, let's say 100% free from the security risk, right? And that's something is like the business would be okay with. Business doesn't expect you to have a free from the 100% risk, but near to 100% what they are fine with, right? And overall, the whatever risk level we come to, that should be complied to the industry practices, right? Now let's look at from the IP compliance perspective. We are utilizing some code, right? And because of the content which you use from the open source community, it ultimately ends up in losing our intellectual property, right? Why it happened? The weakness in the system is we didn't check before we ship to the customer. What it could lead to is the legal issues, right? And the impact would be, it will be multifold, either the financial loss, brand loss, or ultimately the intellectual property loss. The one code which you are owning, right? It might be given away to you might need to give away that code to the community, right? Okay, so what could be the possible controls we can implement there? Before we release this application in the market, what we need to do is we need to ensure that we have checked the code. So whatever licensing terms defined by that author, we are adhering to all of them. For example, it's okay to use GPL code if we are okay to distribute code to the community. If we are not, probably we don't have any right to use that code, right? So that's what gives the kind of a near to 100% guarantee that there is no chance of IP litigations, right? So this is what I call as the risk management, managing the risk, right? You need to know that what you are supposed to do with the licensing terms, right? Having the business accepted that risk is called what I call as the governance, establishing the governance framework in the organization so we don't get into legal issues. And ultimately, it has to comply with the organization policy and the industry best practices. Okay. Now we understand that there could be a risk, so we need to act on it. But how? Okay. Now I have a team. I have a contractor, a certified consultant who knows about the licensing aspects of the open source software, right? I have purchased one compliance tool which will tell me that in your, let's say, 10 million lines of code where all there are issues related to, let's say, open source compliance. I have myself read about the licensing terms of that particular open source component. Now I'm ready to answer the questions, right? I have convinced my legal team it's okay to use this tool, or it's okay to use this open source component as a part of a product or application, right? And I've got a friendly auditor on a call in case, let's say, I run into some situation. I can give him a call saying that this is the situation right now, tell me how to come out of it, right? So these are so many things to do, right? One more, the backup plan. You and I have a backup plan. Let's say if I cannot use the one component, I'll find out the alternative, right? Where do I shoot? What I'm supposed to do? I need to do all these things, but how am I supposed to do it, right? So what we need is, we need a kind of a proper framework here, a framework of the governance, risk and compliance. So at a governance level, we need to set up a kind of a OSRB, Open Source Review Board. Now this team knows about the legal aspects of the open source components, so they can guide us. We need to establish a policy that what all licensing softwares we are allowed to use, what all we should not be using it, in what cases, situation, what condition we can use it, right? The last one is the establishing the controls, right? So let's say now I have OSRB in place, who is a kind of a review team. Now I have a legal compliance team in place, who have created the policies guidelines, and now actually I need to check into this my own product application what could be the potential issues, right? So first of all, I need to identify what all open source components are being used in my product or application. The second step is to review each one of them, their licensing terms, if there are any special conditions, in what condition you can use it. I need to first of all document all of them. So let's say if I'm using the 500 components as a part of my product application, I need to have documentation of that. What is that software? What is the version I'm using? What is the associated license? Have I modified the code? Am I going to ship this product to my customers? So all this information I need to document it, right? And in some of the cases you might need to remediate as well. For example, let's say you are using a code which is coming from the Apache license, right? You are okay to use that code as far as you are adhering to the Apache licensing terms, right? And Apache, let's say Apache licensing is kind of a little bit permissive, so it does not ask you to distribute the code. But if you see the other part, the, let's say, GPL code, right? If you are using as a part of your product or application, you need to distribute your source code as well. So if you are okay to distribute, it's perfectly fine. But if you are not okay, then probably you need to find the alternatives, right? And we do this on ongoing basis. It's not a one-time process. Wherever we make write a new code, wherever we make a new release, we need to check for this open source thing. Now, what is this open source review board supposed to do? So it basically comprises of the legal, development and security team. So legal because they understand the licensing, development team because the developers who have written the code, and security because the whatever open source component which you are using code, it might be having a vulnerabilities, right? Right. Review and approve policy for the external source software. Let's say if you are getting this happens in the, let's say, in case of banks or the financial organization where they get the software developed from the outside. So whenever the vendor delivers the code, we need to go through that code and find out that what all open source components are being used in that code. And if we are if there are any the IP infringement related issues, probably we need to take care of. Right. Establish the scope of information required and the retained. So as I said earlier that we need to collect all the information, which open source component we are using, what is the version, what is the license associated with that, whether we are going to ship it, whether we are going to modify it, all the information needs to be recorded. and we need to take a case-by-case decision. For example, let's say we are using Apache code or let's say GPL code, which we are not going to distribute or commercially sell it. Probably it's okay to use it, right? But if we are not sure about it, probably we need to take different decisions in case of different cases, right? Review and approve the policy for compliance with the obligations, right? So every licensing has a list of the obligations which you need to oblige to, right? So you need to go through each one of them. So let's say, for example, in case of Apache, you need to ensure that the copyright notice is retained in the code. If you remove it, then again it's a violating the licensing terms specified by the Apache, right? So it's okay to use Apache code, but ensure that we retain the copyright notice, right? And this OSRB can review to the CFO, VP Engineering, and they can give a periodic status on the compliance, where we are standing, how our products are using the open source components, right? Now, one of the point which came up earlier is, are we using a tool to identify this, or whether we need to use a tool, or we need to just establish the process, right? So the thing is, the process is important. The process to identify, review, document, remediate, and manage on ongoing basis is important. Tool comes later. We can utilize any tool to identify the open source components. Even there is one tool called Fossology, which is by HP. So it's available on the open source community, which you can utilize to find out what are the open source components you are using in your code or application, right? The important point is, first finalize on the process part, then decide the tool. If the tool implementation takes too much time, probably the whole your project can fail, right? In some of the cases, let's say you need to define the, let's say, multiple level of approvals in your organization. So decide the tool which provides this kind of functionality, which provides the kind of a workflow management, and the features which you feel that which is right and appropriate for organization, only those kind of tool needs to be used, right? Okay. So what to do day after tomorrow? So tomorrow is Sunday. What to do on Monday? We need to set up a kind of a OSRB who is responsible to ensuring that the organization does not get into any legal issues, right? Establish a policy to use of externally sourced software. So we need to clearly define that whenever somebody delivers the code to us, what are the different checkpoints, or what are different checks we need to carry out, right? Don't stop at intellectual property. Check the security aspect as well. The code which is delivered by the external vendors, or the code which is coming from outside, maybe let's say from open source community, before you use into your product application, you ensure that it is free from the vulnerabilities, right? Conduct periodic audits. It's not a one-time process, as I said earlier. Whenever there is a change in the code, whenever you make a new release, you need to scan the code for the IP compliance as well as the security aspect of it. Audit any software which you acquire via M&A. Let's say you are acquiring a company which comes with a product portfolio. So all the product code needs to be scanned to ensure that you do not get any legal issues later on, right? So that's it. That's it from my side. If you have any questions, I'm open to question and answers. Yeah.
Your company actually consults on this, like compliance thing? So you actually go to different organizations and actually evaluate the code for compliance?
Yeah, so basically what we can help is to identify the open source component which is being used in your product application, or let's say the entire set of portfolios. But generally we do not consult on the legal aspect of it. We can help you identify what are the open source components, what are the associated licenses, and then probably the legal team from the organization needs to be involved to take a decision, right, whether it is appropriate to use this code or not.
Yeah. Right, so there are products in the market which actually do this for us, right? Any company can actually acquire, buy this Black Duck software or something and actually do it themselves. So what is the additional thing from a consultant perspective?
Well, I mean, that depends. For example, let's say you might want to do it for a one product or application. In that case, it doesn't make sense to go for the entire tool. In that case, you can involve our kind of organization to do a one-time audit to identify all the open source components and document them. But let's say if you are implementing the policy at the organization level, where all your product and application which is being developed in-house or which are commercially distributed, you want to ensure that they are free from the IP-related issues. In that case, the tool, process, and everything needs to be established. So that something can be done by the organization itself, but wherever one-time audit is required, at that, we can help. Or let's say in some of the cases, the organization don't want to develop the expertise on doing the open source code audits or finding the IP compliance related issues. In that case, we can help.
Right, one more question. We are seeing a lot of open source usage by Indian corporations. Right, so are we seeing a lot of violations or issues there?
Yes, we do. So as I given in the example, so in every company, the 60 to 65% code is coming from the open source on an average, right? So in some of the cases, let's say you have a file with the 5,000 lines of code. Out of that, let's say 100 lines are coming from the, let's say, open source code. So it's okay to use it. I mean, everybody use it. Everybody utilize the open source community. Even everybody contributes back to the community. But wherever we need to adhere to licensing terms, at that time we need to be careful.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.